What's up, dudes, and welcome to another Cinehorde review. You guys know who I am. This is Captain Gimpy coming at you. And today we're going to talk about a film that I like. I just like its previous Swedish incarnation a little better. For those of you who have already guessed it, you're right. We're talking about the remake to Let the Right One In, titled Let Me in America. This film is directed by Max Reeves, who you might know from the two Cloverfield films, Cloverfield proper, right, the first one, and two, 10 Cloverfield Lane. I think he wrote that one. I'm not entirely sure if he directed it. This version of the film uh, stars the dude who plays Nightcrawler in all the X-Men movies recently that Nightcrawler is in, including Dark Phoenix, whose name I cannot remember to save my life at the moment. And second, Chloe Grace Moretz, who you guys might recognize from the Netflix movie Brain on Fire and the blockbuster movie from a few years ago, The Equalizer, also starring Denzel Washington. Now, this film is quintessentially a love story which happens to have a vampire in it. It was never intended to be a vampire film per se. The focus is on the whole budding relationship between a male character by the name of Owen, played by Mr. Nightcrawler, and a girl named Abby, played by Chloe Grace. And so I really like a lot of things about this movie. Um, I like what Chloe brings to the table because her portrayal of a feminine vampire is a lot more tender, and there are moments where she acts in a way that betrays the fact that she may actually be older than her 12-year-old body would make her seem. While at the same time, she's still able to act like a 12-year-old girl. Um, by contrast, the Swedish film had still a very feminine actress playing her, but her the way she portrayed the character was a lot more boyish, a lot more savage, a little less tender, a bit more cold. So I like that about this version of the film. She's a lot more tender. It makes sense that the two would end up essentially together, and that was really awesome. I also really like Chloe Grace Moretz. I have since I've been aware of her work. I think she's a tremendous actress. I think she often gets put in some movies that don't have such great writing, but that's a matter of opinion. Back to our film. Um, Now, the kid Owen gets bullied tremendously by three dudes, ringleadered by King Douche. And you come to find out through the storytelling in the film that he's merely perpetuating the way he gets treated by his older brother. And as Owen begins to understand that, he basically tries to stay out of the way. Unfortunately for him, that doesn't end up happening because there's a series of things that happen which basically force them into each other's path. So the way that Abby and Owen meet is actually really sweet. They live in the same apartment complex. Abby lives with a much older man who we think is her father at first, and it turns out that there is a bit of a Easter eggy plot twist for those of you who follow different iterations of the story, and I thought it was really cool. Don't want to spoil it here. Um, they bond over puzzles. Abby likes puzzles. Owen gives her a Rubik's Cube, which she solves and then returns to him. And on that second meeting, he starts talking about his problems at school. And she basically tells him that if they hit you, you have to hit them back. And he's like, well, there's three of them. And she was like, well, hit harder. and then they won't mess with you. So one day, Owen and his PE class are out on the ice doing ice hockey like things and skating around for physical activity. The bully dude comes up with his cronies, and Owen is like, you know what, forget this, and he smacks him hard to the point where he's bleeding on the ice and he's crying, and he's like, yes, I did it. He actually goes to Abby and he's like, check this out. I did it. I did it. I did it. I'm awesome. Now, their relationship develops over time. They share more secrets. There's actually a bedroom scene. They do not have sex, as far as I'm aware, in the film, but it's really, really tender, and it's one of the highlights for me. There's this tiny, small highlight in the film with that scene, and I think that both versions of that scene are amazing. They're really poetic. And at the same time, it doesn't feel like an entirely grown up love. They're still trying to figure things out, and it's wonderfully awkward, and it's one of the things I love about the movie. Another difference that I actually like is the amount of gore in the film. And this is because the original Let the Right One In sort of eschewed gore in favor of implied savagery. But when you see the gore on screen, for me, it highlights the dichotomy between feminine tenderness and utter savagery of being a vampire. And I thought that that added a nice dimension to the character that was not necessarily entirely present in the original film. Now, on to what I didn't quite like when compared to the Swedish film. The biggest thing for me, well, there's a couple things. First of all, in the Swedish film, the relationship between Abby and her caretaker is more ambiguous. In fact, you are left to wonder whether or not this dude that she lives with is a pedophile. And in the American film, that relationship is explicitly clarified to the point where you come away looking at the character entirely different. That's not what I mind so much. What I mind is that the male caretaker character is a serial killer in both films, but in the Swedish version, he kind of has social guile that he uses to pick off his victims. He's basically draining them so that Abby will have blood to feed on. And she, I guess, thinks it's less messy to do it that way. They never tell you. So he does this for her. And in the American version of the film, he's a trash bag suit wearing vanilla sort of psycho American remake serial killer who just hides in back seats and tries to stab people. And I'm like, well, that's not very creative. Uh, that's just my personal taste. It kind of takes away from it for me. The other thing about this film is the editing and cinematography when compared to the Swedish film. The Swedish film uses a lot more focal distance. The shots are wider. And so you never really get the sense that this is a horror film, primarily because the way the director and the writer saw that film, it's not a horror story, and it's more of a supernatural romance, which is cool. This film, on the other hand, uses a lot of sort of stock suspense, thriller, horror, cinematography, and editing tricks to confuse the movie, in my opinion. You can never really tell if this is the story you already know, if you've seen the previous version, or if they're going to ramp up the horror angle. And I just find it a little clunky, personally. The other thing that I think is in this version, the American version of the film, there is um, a detective subplot. In fact, I've seen online that because of that, many people mislabel this as a noir film. And first of all, if there's going to be a noir film in today's time, it would be a neo noir film. Second, uh, there's no femme fatale. There's no hard boiled detective. The detective, in fact, isn't even fleshed out as a character. Um, he's just kind of there running around, and they kind of use him as a way to play with the chronology between the two films. And that's basically it. And he dies, and he doesn't matter. Uh, and those are the things I really didn't like about it. But I would recommend seeing it. I do like the movie. If you can find it on Redbox, or you happen to find it at maybe like Dimple, oh shit, Dimple's closing, or whatever, I think it's totally worth watching. Um, if you don't mind subtitles, I highly recommend watching both films and making up your own mind, because they're both pretty awesome. They're just very different, and in my personal opinion, one is executed a little better. Oh, so for those of you I almost forgot, my bad, dudes. For those of you who've watched reviews of this film, you may have seen a scene where either film where there's a boy in the pool and there's mayhem going on and stuff is dripping into the pool like heads, parts of other parts of the body, and so forth. In this version of the film, as opposed to the Swedish version, I actually like what they did with the scene because Owen, the 12-year-old male character, keeps his eyes open. And to me, I read it as he completely accepts Abby for who she is. He wants to see that side of her. He understands that she's trying to protect him, and he's willing to lose a piece of his innocence to show his acceptance, because he never looks away from her from that point forward. And the movie ends on this note of them possibly traveling together. And if you watch this version of the film, you'll start thinking about the connection between Owen on one hand and her older male caretaker figure on the other. Like I said, dudes, watch the movies. They're both good, and I'll see you next time at the movies.